All right. Hello, everybody. So welcome to Grammar Lecture 1, Past Perfect and Past Perfect Progressive. There are a couple things that I recommend that you have before we get started here. I recommend that first, sorry as I get my stuff jigger-jaggered here, I recommend that first you try to have your book with you, okay, your textbook, beautiful book. So I highly recommend that you use it as much as possible. Okay, you're focused on Grammar 4. I suggest you just have it open in case you want to take notes as you're listening. We will be on pages 40 and 42 of our book. I also recommend that you have, this is actually a high recommendation, that you have a piece of paper and a pencil ready to write down any questions that you might have. All right, and these are questions that you can ask me. You can either send them to me in an email and I can answer them, or you can bring them to class and I will answer them in class, whichever works best for you. But be ready to write those questions down, and feel free to pause the video if you want to, take time to write down your questions. So let me make my face smaller there. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive on into this. First, we're going to look at the grammar chart for the past perfect, talk about kind of the basic rules with the past perfect, and then we'll look at the past perfect progressive. And again, look at the rules of that, and then how do you use them together and some different things like that. So let's go. All right, so this is the basic chart. I'm not going to go into it too much. You can take some time to review this on your own. I recommend that you do that before you come to class. But basically, okay, the structure of past perfect is subject plus had, had not, plus past participle, then the rest of your sentence. So I had arrived in the US by then. All right, over here they show you the contractions, which I think, is great information to have. This is definitely what we would use in spoken English more. Okay, you're more likely to hear people say, I'd arrived in the US by then than I had arrived. Okay, in written English, you might not see it quite as much, unless you'll see it in texts, emails, kind of casual writing, but in academic writing, you won't see it quite as much. All right, so that's just kind of the basic structure. You also have the structure of yes/no questions. You have had plus subject plus past participle. Okay, so in this case, had you arrived in the US by then? And the answer's very easy. Yes, I had, or no, I hadn't. Okay, very straightforward. WH questions. All right, so we have how many. So it's specifically the how question word. How many concerts had he given by then? So when you're at forming this type of a question, okay, you'll kind of start it off, and then you'll have had plus subject plus past participle. All right, so we will kind of continue. Let me talk about some of the rules with it. Again, you can review these charts on your own. If you have any questions about the charts, feel free to write those down and bring those to class. All right, so when do I use the past perfect? Okay, because charts are awesome, but doesn't really tell you how to use it or when to use it. Okay, so this is extremely important. I highly recommend that you remember this. Remember this rule. You use the past perfect to show that something happened before a specific time in the past. All right, so use the past perfect to show that something happened before a specific time in the past. All right, so when you're talking about something that happened in the past, okay, it's a way to show, that, well, this happened before that other thing in the past, essentially. All right, so we will come back to this in a minute, okay, that the focus is often on the completion of an action. Okay, this isn't always the case with past perfect, but I will show you an example, and this is very clearly the case. So like I said, we'll come back to that. All right, so here's an example of a past perfect sentence. So it says so before I get into this, just to tell you, this is a person's name, Dudamel. He was a Venezuelan musician, okay? He played classical music, and he became a conductor, all right? Like a world famous conductor of orchestras, okay? So played very, beautiful, fancy music. All right, so here's the sentence. By 1980, so let me talk about this chart real fast before I forget about that. Okay, so we have this chart. Okay, this is a timeline. All right, so here we've got, this kind of represents the past, years and years ago, and this is the future. Okay, we're not really dealing with the future today. We're focusing on the past. And this is now. All right, so here's a star showing us 1986, and here's another star showing us began lessons. Okay, so the sentence says, by 1986, Dudamel had begun violin lessons. All right, so by this year, he had already started learning how to play the violin. Okay, so lost my train of thought. So Dudamel, it's basically saying, at this point in time, Dudamel, was playing the violin. It's hard for me to kind of explain the sentence more without using the past perfect. Okay, but this kind of shows us that he started learning to play the violin before this point in the past. Okay, so these are both events in the past. It's just kind of a way to show when Dudamel started violin lessons. Okay, he started them before 1986. We don't know exactly when, okay, but we do know that it was before 1986 that he started to learn to play the violin. All right, then we have this sentence, okay, it's now a new year, okay, it was 2004, okay, at this point in time, he had been a conductor for several years, all right, so they don't tell us exactly when he started conducting music, but we know that it had been a few years since he had started conducting. Okay, and then Cato is a different conductor, but this sentence says, by 2010, Cato had conducted Beethoven's Ninth Symphony for the first time. So this is an example of what I kind of showed you before, just very quickly, where it says the focus is often on the completion of an action. All right, so in this case, Cato, okay, had conducted the symphony. That was done, it was over with. All right, before 2010. Okay, we don't know when Cato conducted the Ninth Symphony, but we know that she had conducted it for the first time by 2010. Okay, so in this case, the action, okay, is completed. The action of conducting Beethoven's Ninth Symphony for her first time is done. Okay. All right. So that is the past perfect. All right, so I suggest if you have any questions about the past perfect, pause the video, write down any questions that you have, and then we'll continue to the past perfect progressive. All right, past perfect progressive. The past perfect progressive, also known as the past perfect continuous, right? They mean the same thing, so if you've heard continuous, it's the same as progressive. Basically, okay, this is the basic structure. Got subject, okay, just like with the past perfect subject. In this case, we have had been or had not been, plus the base form of the verb plus ing. So the base form would be play plus ing is, makes the verb playing. Okay, so I had not been playing all over the world by then. All right, and we'll see more examples of that in a moment. The yes, no questions, okay, you start with had, the subject, and then been. Okay, plus the base form. So, had you been playing all over the world by then? Say, yes, I had, or no, I hadn't. Okay. Then you have your WH questions. Okay, still sticking with that. How? Okay, how long had he been playing? Okay, same thing, been plus the base form plus ing. How long had he been playing classical music by then? All right. So again, if you have any questions about these charts, feel free to write them down. We will be talking about the specific rules of when to use past perfect progressive right now. So when do I use the past perfect progressive? All right, so this is something else. It's very, 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 very important. You are going to want to remember this. Okay, you use the past perfect progressive to show that an action was in progress before a specific time in the past. All right, so you use the past perfect progressive to show that an action was in progress before a specific time in the past. All right, so I just want you to think about how you would use the present progressive or present continuous. Just think, okay, so it's that same thing, except now I'm learning how to do it in the past. Okay, so let's look at, oh, and remember, okay, so with past perfect progressive, the focus is on the continuation of the action, not the end result. All right, so let's go ahead and look at, for example, so we have this beautiful chart again. All right, there is a slight change though. Okay, the years have changed. We've got 2010 and 1998. All right, so here is the sentence that we have that kind of shows how we use the past perfect progressive. It says, by 2010, Cato had been conducting, okay, so we got the had been, okay, conduct would be the base form of the verb plus ing. Okay, by 2010, Cato had been conducting an orchestra for 12 years. All right. So we know that back in 1998 is when Cato started. So we can assume, let's see, sorry. You know, so, you know, at this point, she was still conducting in 2010 and possibly continued to conduct. This tells us that for those 12 years before 2010, she had also been conducting. All right, so now there are some important things to note with the past perfect progressive. All right, we can use the past perfect progressive for finished actions that had just ended. All right, they need to have just barely ended. We should still be able to see kind of the results of the action. So for example, okay, the sentence says, she was out of breath. It was clear that she had been running. All right, so in this case, you know, the person was out of breath, which means, you know, it's hard for her to breathe because she had been running. All right, so, you know, from this, so at this point in time, she is not running anymore, but we can tell that she had been running. All right, so that's an example of when you can use the past perfect progressive for a finished action. Okay, let's see. Another thing to remember is that non-action verbs are not usually used in the progressive. Okay, so in this, here's a sentence, you know, it was 2008, he had been a conductor for several years. All right, sentence works, it makes sense. You would not say he had been being a conductor. That makes absolutely no sense. All right, so just remember that most of the time, if not all the time, you will, when using the past perfect progressive, just like the present continuous, you will probably stick with those action verbs, okay? You're not gonna make a non-action verb a progressive, okay? All right, so we have a couple more things to cover before we wrap up. So, and I apologize for the amount of times I say so. I am trying to work on that. All right, so we have the past perfect and the past perfect progressive, okay? And I actually recommend, before you look at this slide, if you have any questions about the past perfect progressive, pause the video, write those down, and then come back in just a second. All right, so using the past perfect and past perfect progressive. All right, so you can use these, all right, with the simple past to show a relationship between the two. All right, so you've got two events, and you can use the past perfect and past perfect progressive with the simple past to show us, you know, how are those two events connected. All right, so here is an example. Okay, again, our beautiful chart here has one competition. This is living in Venezuela. So when you are using this structure, okay, you are going to use the past perfect or past perfect progressive for the earlier event, in this case, living in Venezuela. And you would use the simple past for the later time or event. In this case is one, which is one competition. So our sentence is, he had been living in Venezuela when he won a competition in Germany. Okay, so we have he had been living in Venezuela. That's a continuing action. Okay, so he was living in Venezuela, but while he was living in Venezuela, he won a competition in Germany. All right, and I actually have an additional example for this to show you. So we're going to stop this share. Okay, we will come back to the PowerPoint in 1 minute. I'm just gonna pull up this whiteboard just to show you this example. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So, and as I'm doing this, feel free to, you know, if you can think of any of your own examples, maybe thinking of things that have happened in your past that you could use to, you know, create your, maybe your own sentences using this structure. So we have, you know, I had been attending Utah State University when I met my husband. Okay, so, you know, I was attending Utah State University when I met my husband, okay, or the man who would become my husband. All right, that was one moment in time. Okay, so I use a simple past for, there we go. So this, okay, is going to be the simple past. Sorry, this is a lot harder than it probably looks. Simple, I'll just write simple past. Okay, well, this is going to be, you know what it is before I tell you? Think about it. All right, it's going to be the past. I'm just going to do initials here. Past perfect progressive. Okay, so all three of those. Okay, so that is one example of that. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go back. So that's my example that I have. Again, you know, when I'm giving examples like this, feel free to, you know, maybe jot down any examples you think of, okay? Sometimes, you know, it's amazing what kind of comes to our mind as we're listening to these and as we actually start thinking about, okay, how can I use this? All right. Let's see. Oops, past where we are. Sorry, trying to get back here. Okay, so that is that. All right, so then using the past perfect and past perfect progressive just a little bit more. When the time relationship between the two past events is clear, okay, we often use the simple past for both events. So you will not always use the past perfect or past perfect progressive when you're doing this. So if you're using phrases such as before, after, and as soon as, all right, you'll probably use the simple past for both. So for example, okay, so these examples I'm showing you, both are correct. I'm just going to tell you which one is the one that you're more likely to hear. Okay, so we have, after Dudamel had joined El Sistema, he studied the violin. Okay, So after, that's kind of our time phrase, kind of gives us a sense in time. Had joined, okay, that's our past perfect. El sistema, he studied the violin, so that's our simple past, right? It's a correct sentence, it makes sense, it works, okay? But we could also say, and this would also be correct, after Dudamel joined El Sistema, he studied the violin, okay? It means the same thing, and it still makes sense, okay? So, but this is the more common, all right? If, again, it's when that time relationships between the two are clear, okay? When we use those expressions like after, before, or as soon as. Okay, now one thing to remember, all right, when you're using the word when it comes to, you know, do I use the past perfect and the simple past, or do simple past and simple past, you have to be careful with when, all right, and I'll show you why. So here are two examples. Okay, so when the concert ended, she left. All right, so in this case, first the concert ended and she left. Okay, both simple past, very clear. Or you've got this one. When the concert ended, she had left. Okay, so in this case, you know, we have the past perfect. So when the concert ended, she had left. And this means something entirely different. It means that first you left and then the concert ended. So you want to keep that in mind, okay, when you're using when. It's generally safer to stick with both simple past in both. Unless you know exactly what you're trying to say and you are trying to say that she left before the concert ended, then you would be safe. All right, one last thing and then we will be done. Okay, we often use the past perfect and the past perfect progressive with by plus time or event, or by the time plus time clause. All right, so lots of words. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. And we usually use the simple past in the time clause for the later time or event. So let me show you an example of that, okay, because I get lost in the words. I have to see examples. All right, so by 2006, in this case, so by plus the time or event, okay, so this is a time, by the year 2006, Gustavo had gotten married. All right, so this is, you know, the past perfect, okay, so by this time, he had gotten married. All right, so if we go back to our examples, okay, so that's our first example of by plus time or event. Next, we're going to have by the time plus time clause. All right, so by the time, okay, so we have that phrase, and this is our time clause. We got tickets, so that kind of gives us that moment in time. Okay, the time is when they were buying the tickets, or okay, so it's that moment in time. So by the time we got tickets, we had been waiting in line for an hour. Okay, so in this case, it's the past perfect progressive. That's how long they were in line to buy tickets, right? It took them, you know, an hour of waiting in line to get those tickets. All right, so let's see. We use the words already, yet, ever, never, and just with the past perfect to emphasize which event happened first. All right, I'm not sure if you noticed this, but as I was talking earlier, I actually used this form when I was speaking. I kind of mentally noticed it myself. So let's look at an example. All right, so this is the conversation between two people. Okay, so Jason and I watched Dudamel on YouTube last night. Jason had already seen him conduct. All right, so had seen is the past perfect, and we use that word already to put emphasis that, you know, Jason had seen him conduct. It had already happened, okay? And then the next person said, had you ever seen him before? Okay, again, he could have said, had you seen him before, and it would have worked. But saying, had you ever seen him before, gives just a little bit of more emphasis on, you know, if this had happened before, you know, watching this conductor on YouTube, if the person had ever seen this person before. And the answer is simple, no, I hadn't. Okay, and then again, I had just heard of him. Okay, just being that emphasis on that, you know, yeah, you know, that was the first time I ever had heard of this person. Okay, now just remember, okay, when you're doing this, you do not want to put an adverb between the main verb and a direct object. So you can say, I hadn't seen him yet, or I hadn't yet seen him. But you do not want to say, I hadn't seen yet him. All right, so just keep that in mind. All right, so that's about it for our lecture for today. I'm sorry if anything seemed a little bit rough. I'm hoping that as I continue this, that I'll get a little bit better and more smooth at this. One last note, I do recommend, if you look at the bottom of page 42, there are some reference notes that gives you a list of irregular past participles and also spelling rules for progressive forms. I recommend that you review those. Again, just to kind of freshen your memory on maybe some things you already know, hopefully learn something new as well. If you have any questions, again, jot those down, get them to me. And as a reminder, some things that you need to remember from this lecture, okay? First of all, you need to remember, okay, that you use the past perfect to show that something happened before a specific time in the past. All right, so use it to show that something happened before a specific time in the past. Okay, and you use the past perfect progressive to show that an action was in progress before a specific time in the past. Those are two things you really need to remember. Something else I really, really, really want you to remember as well is that my daughter's name is Lucy. Okay, that is very important for you to remember. So I hope you enjoyed this video and that it did not take too much of your time. Don't forget to get online and get onto Talon and take quiz number 2. And I look forward to seeing you in class.